What if the game you were forced to play wasn't for points or prestige, but for your very life? Tonight, we delve into a world where masks conceal deadly secrets and every choice could be your last. But before we begin our descent into this deadly game, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, so you don't miss a moment of the heart-stopping suspense. Now, let's go behind the mask. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a credit card offer and a flyer for a local pizzeria. It was an anomaly of elegance in the mundane landscape of my mailbox. The envelope was thick, creamy cardstock, the color of old ivory, and sealed with a dollop of black wax bearing an intricate, unidentifiable crest. My name, Leo Vance, was calligraphed across the front in shimmering silver ink. There was no return address. Curiosity, that age-old catalyst for trouble, got the better of me. Inside, a single, heavy card awaited. The message was as minimalist as it was perplexing. You are cordially invited to participate in a game of consequence, an opportunity to transcend the ordinary. The Elysian Estate. Friday at dusk. A mask will be provided. Below this cryptic message was a small, embossed symbol that matched the wax seal, a stylized Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail, but with a Venetian mask at its center. My life, up to that point, had been a masterclass in the ordinary. I was a junior archivist at the City Museum, a job that involved more dust than discovery. My days were a predictable rhythm of cataloging forgotten artifacts and fielding questions from amateur historians. My evenings were solitary affairs, spent with takeout and classic films. The invitation felt like a glitch in the matrix of my monotonous existence, a door to a reality I hadn't known existed. Part of me, the sensible, cautious part, screamed to throw it away, to dismiss it as an elaborate prank. But a deeper, more dormant part of my soul, the part that yearned for something more than the quiet hum of fluorescent lights, was intrigued. On Friday, as the sun began its slow, fiery descent, I found myself in a rented tuxedo, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. A sleek, black car, as silent as a shadow, had arrived at my apartment precisely at the appointed hour. The driver, a stoic man in a dark suit, had simply nodded at my unasked question and opened the door. The journey was a blur of city lights giving way to winding country roads, culminating in the appearance of a pair of wrought iron gates that swung open as if by magic. The Elysian Estate was less a house and more a palace, a sprawling Gothic revival mansion that clawed at the twilight sky with its turrets and spires. The air here was different, cleaner, laced with the scent of pine and damp earth. As I stepped out of the car, another figure, equally imposing as the driver, handed me a box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a mask. It was a classic Venetian botta, all sharp angles and gilded filigree, its stark white surface devoid of any expression. It was both beautiful and unsettling. Once inside, the sheer opulence of the estate was staggering. The grand foyer was a cavern of marble and gold, with a chandelier that dripped crystals like frozen tears. And I was not alone. Dozens of other guests, all clad in formal wear and identical white masks, milled about, their voices a low, cautious murmur. The masks were a great equalizer, stripping away age, race, and social status, leaving only a sea of anonymous figures. I wondered what kind of people had received the same cryptic invitation. A tech billionaire? A struggling artist? A jaded socialite? There was no way to tell. A string quartet played a somber melody from a balcony overlooking the hall, the music weaving through the tense atmosphere. Champagne flutes clinked, but the laughter was brittle, forced. Everyone, it seemed, was as on edge as I was. We were all actors in a play we hadn't auditioned for, and the script was a mystery. As the last rays of sunlight bled from the sky, a voice, smooth and disembodied, echoed through the grand hall, seemingly from the very walls themselves. Welcome, esteemed guests, to the masquerade of whispers. You have all been chosen for your unique potential, for the quiet desperation that hums beneath the surface of your ordinary lives. You are here because you crave more. A collective, nervous shuffle rippled through the crowd. The voice continued, its tone a chilling blend of warmth and menace. Tonight you will play a game. A game of secrets, of choices, of consequences. The rules are simple. You will be presented with a series of dilemmas. Your choices will determine your fate. Success will be rewarded beyond your wildest dreams. Failure. Well, let us just say that failure is not an option. A palpable wave of fear washed over the room. This was no ordinary party. This was something far more sinister. The disembodied voice then instructed us to find a small, velvet pouch that had been discreetly placed in the pocket of each of our jackets or purses. Inside mine, I found a single, polished obsidian stone, cool and heavy in my palm. These stones are your lives, the voice explained. Guard them well. The first game is about to begin. It is a game of observation, of deduction. Somewhere in this room, one of you is not who they seem. One of you is a whisperer, an agent of our design. Your task is to identify this individual before the clock strikes 10. To do so, you must mingle, you must converse, you must look beyond the masks. If the whisperer is identified, they will be eliminated from the game. If they are not, they will choose one of you to be eliminated instead. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the fragile veneer of composure in the room. The murmuring ceased, replaced by a tense, heavy silence. We were no longer guests at a mysterious soiree. We were a herd of deer that had just scented a predator. The elegant ballroom had transformed into a hunting ground, and we were all both hunter and hunted. The clock on the grand mantelpiece began to chime, its resonant tones marking the beginning of our deadly game. 2 hours. We had 2 hours to unmask a traitor in our midst, or one of us would pay the ultimate price. I clutched the obsidian stone in my pocket, its coldness a stark reminder of what was at stake. The initial moments were a chaotic dance of suspicion. People who had been politely chatting moments before now eyed each other with undisguised distrust. Small groups formed, broke apart, and reformed, conversations held in hushed, urgent tones. The masks, once a symbol of anonymity, now felt like a cruel joke, hiding the very expressions that might betray a lie. I decided my best course of action was to observe, to listen. I was an archivist, after all. My trade was in sifting through the detritus of the past to find the truth. Perhaps those skills could be applied here. I moved through the room, a ghost in a gilded cage, my ears straining to catch snippets of conversation. I overheard a man with a deep, booming voice, his mask unable to conceal his imposing stature, trying to take charge, to organize a systematic interrogation of everyone present. His efforts were met with a mixture of fear and resentment. A woman with a trembling voice, her slender frame almost swallowed by her ball gown, suggested that perhaps there was no whisperer, that this was all just a psychological game. Her theory was quickly dismissed as naive wishful thinking. I found myself drawn to a quiet corner where a small group had gathered. A woman, her mask adorned with a single black feather, was speaking in a calm, analytical tone. "We need to think logically," she said, her voice a steady anchor in the swirling sea of paranoia. "The whisperer will be trying to blend in, to appear as scared as the rest of us. But they will also be subtly trying to sow discord, to turn us against each other." A man with a nervous tic, his fingers constantly adjusting his mask, countered, "But how can we know? Anyone could be acting. You could be the whisperer trying to gain our trust." The woman with the feather didn't flinch. "True," she conceded. "But baseless accusations will get us nowhere. We need to look for inconsistencies, for slips of the tongue, for behavior that doesn't quite fit." Her name, I learned, was Alara. She had a sharp, incisive mind that cut through the fear-fueled hysteria. The nervous man was Julian, and the other two in their small circle were a stoic, silent man named Marcus and a young, wide-eyed woman named Chloe. I found myself gravitating towards their small island of relative sanity. We decided to stick together to share our observations. We reasoned that 4 pairs of eyes were better than 1. We moved through the room as a unit, observing the other guests trying to piece together the puzzle. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. The initial frenzy had subsided, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. The string quartet continued to play, their haunting melodies a macabre soundtrack to our desperate search. As the clock hand crept towards 10, a new wave of panic began to set in. We were no closer to identifying the whisperer than we had been at the start. Every person I observed seemed genuinely terrified. The booming man, who I mentally dubbed the General, had managed to alienate most of the room with his aggressive tactics. A group of younger guests had resorted to nervously downing champagne, their laughter becoming increasingly manic. It was Chloe who noticed it first. She pointed a trembling finger towards a man standing alone by the fireplace, his back to the room. He was one of the few people who hadn't moved much throughout the ordeal. He had simply stood there, a silent sentinel, observing the chaos. "He's not scared," Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible. "Look at him. Everyone else is a wreck, but he's calm." We all turned to look. She was right. There was an unnerving stillness about him. While the rest of us were fidgeting, pacing, and whispering frantically, he was as motionless as a statue. Alara's eyes narrowed. It could be a bluff. He could be trying to project an aura of innocence by appearing detached. Or, I added, my voice low, he could be the one enjoying the show. We decided to approach him. As we drew closer, he turned, his masked face betraying no emotion. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice surprisingly mild. "We were just wondering," Alara began, her tone carefully neutral, "why you seem so unconcerned by our current predicament." The man chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "And what would be the point of panicking? It would only cloud my judgment." "A very pragmatic approach," Marcus noted, his voice a low rumble. "Almost too pragmatic." The man simply shrugged. "I am a man of logic. Hysteria is an indulgence I cannot afford." His answers were plausible, yet there was something about his detached demeanor that set my teeth on edge. He was too composed, too controlled. It was as if he was watching a particularly interesting play, rather than being a participant in a life-or-death struggle. The clock began to chime the hour. A collective gasp went through the room. We were out of time. The disembodied voice returned, its smooth tones now laced with a palpable sense of anticipation. "The time has come. You have failed to identify the whisperer. Now the whisperer will make their choice." A chilling silence descended upon the room. We all held our breath, our eyes darting around, trying to guess who the traitor was, who their victim would be. The man by the fireplace suddenly smiled, a slow, cruel smile that was visible even beneath his mask. He raised a hand and pointed a single, steady finger at the General. "I choose him," the man said, his voice no longer mild, but filled with a cold, triumphant authority. The General, who had been blustering about our collective failure, froze, his face a mask of disbelief. "Me? Why me?" The whisperer chuckled again. "You were too loud, too disruptive. You made it difficult for me to observe. A liability." Before anyone could react, two imposing figures in black suits and dark masks emerged from a previously unnoticed side door. They flanked the General, each taking one of his arms. He struggled, his face contorted in a mixture of rage and terror. "No, you can't do this." His protests were cut short as one of the figures produced a syringe and swiftly injected its contents into his neck. The General's eyes widened in shock, and then he went limp, collapsing to the floor like a marionette with its strings cut. A wave of screams and gasps erupted through the room. This was real. The threat was real. Someone had just died in front of us. The two figures unceremoniously dragged the General's body from the room. The whisperer watched them go, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. The disembodied voice returned, a note of mock sympathy in its tone. "A regrettable but necessary outcome. Let this be a lesson to you all. The masquerade of whispers is not a game to be taken lightly. Your first trial is over. For those of you who remain, your reward awaits you in the dining hall. I suggest you enjoy it. The night is far from over." The whisperer then calmly walked towards the main doors, which swung open to allow him to exit. He paused at the threshold and looked back at us, the remaining players. "I'll be seeing you," he said, and then he was gone. A stunned silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of Chloe's ragged sobs. We had all just witnessed a murder, and the chilling realization that any one of us could be next settled over us like a funeral shroud. The beautiful, opulent ballroom now felt like a tomb. I looked at the obsidian stone in my hand. It felt heavier now, its coldness seeping into my very bones. This was the price of failure, and we were just getting started. Driven by a mixture of shock and a morbid curiosity, we slowly made our way to the dining hall. The scene that awaited us was a bizarre tableau of luxury and dread. A long, banquet table was laden with the most exquisite food I had ever seen: roasted meats, exotic fruits, decadent pastries. But no one had any appetite. We sat in stunned silence. The empty chair where the general would have sat a stark reminder of our grim reality. The game had just begun, but it had already claimed its first victim. I looked at the masked faces around me, the faces of my fellow players, and I saw the same fear reflected in their unseen eyes. We were all trapped in this gilded cage, forced to dance to the tune of a madman. And the only way out, it seemed, was to play the game and win, or die trying. The reward of the lavish feast felt more like a cruel mockery than a prize. The clinking of cutlery was a jarring sound in the heavy silence that had fallen over the dining hall. We were a collection of strangers, bound together by a shared trauma, yet trust was a currency none of us could afford to spend. The empty chair at the head of the table, where the general had so boisterously held court just hours before, was a silent, looming testament to the lethality of our situation. After the grim meal, the disembodied voice, which we had begun to refer to as the host, echoed through the hall once more. Its tone was as smooth and unctuous as ever, a chilling counterpoint to the raw fear that gripped us. "I trust you have all had a chance to reflect on the events of the evening. The first trial was a simple test of your deductive reasoning. The next will be a test of your courage, your ingenuity, and your willingness to confront the shadows of the past." A collective tensing of shoulders rippled around the table. The host continued, "You will now proceed to the west wing of the estate, to what was once the private museum of the original owner. There you will find a labyrinth of rooms, each containing a piece of a puzzle. Your task is to solve the puzzle, to uncover the story it tells. But be warned, the labyrinth is not just a collection of artifacts. It is a reflection of a troubled mind, and it does not take kindly to trespassers." The voice then added a final, chilling instruction. "You will be divided into pairs. A small, electronic tablet has been placed at each of your seats. It will display the name of your partner. You have 5 minutes to find your partner and proceed to the West Wing. The game begins at the stroke of midnight. And one more thing. You will not all be leaving the labyrinth." A frantic scramble ensued as we all grabbed the tablets. My screen lit up with a single name, Alara. I felt a small, almost imperceptible wave of relief. Of all the people in this nightmare, she was the one I trusted the most. Her calm, analytical mind was a welcome contrast to my own rising panic. I found her near the grand staircase, her posture as poised as ever, though I could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. "It seems we're partners," I said, my voice coming out a little hoarse. She nodded, her gaze sweeping over the chaotic scene of people frantically searching for their partners. "There's a reason for these pairings," she said, her voice low. "The host is not a fan of random chance. He's trying to create specific dynamics to test us in different ways." I looked around and saw her point. Julian, the nervous man from our initial group, had been paired with a large, intimidating woman who looked like she could snap him in two. Chloe, the young, emotional woman, was with a cold, aloof man who hadn't spoken a word all night. It was a calculated recipe for conflict and distress. Alara and I, along with the other newly formed pairs, made our way to the West Wing. The atmosphere was thick with suspicion. The temporary alliance we had formed in the first game had been shattered. Now it was every pair for themselves. The entrance to the museum was a pair of heavy oak doors, carved with scenes of mythological beasts. As the clock in the main hall began to chime midnight, the doors swung open with a low, groaning sound, revealing a dimly lit corridor. The air that wafted out was cool and musty, carrying the scent of old paper and decay. As we stepped inside, the doors slammed shut behind us, the sound echoing through the long hallway. We were trapped. The labyrinth awaited. The museum was a maze of interconnected rooms, each one filled with an eclectic and unsettling collection of artifacts. There were rooms filled with antique medical equipment, all gleaming steel and cold leather. There were rooms with taxidermied animals, their glass eyes seeming to follow our every move. There were rooms with antique dolls, their painted smiles frozen in a permanent, unnerving grin. In the center of each room was a pedestal, and on each pedestal was an object: a tarnished silver locket, a yellow diary, a child's worn leather shoe. Beside each object was a riddle, etched into a brass plaque. It soon became clear that the riddles were connected, that each one provided a clue to the next. The objects, we realized, were all related to a single tragic story, the story of the family who had once lived in this very estate. As Alara and I moved through the labyrinth, we began to piece together the narrative. It was a story of a wealthy industrialist, his beautiful but fragile wife, and their 2 young children. The diary entries we found spoke of a happy family, of summers spent by the lake and winters by the fire. But as we progressed deeper into the labyrinth, the tone of the story began to change. The wife's entries became more erratic, filled with paranoia and fear. She wrote of strange noises in the night, of feeling like she was being watched. The industrialist's letters revealed a man obsessed with his work, increasingly detached from his family. The riddles were fiendishly clever, often requiring us to interact with the unsettling exhibits in the rooms. In the medical room, we had to decipher a code hidden in an old anatomy chart. In the doll room, we had to arrange the dolls in a specific order based on a cryptic nursery rhyme. The atmosphere was designed to fray our nerves. The lighting was low and flickering. Strange noises: a child's laugh, a woman's sob, a man's angry shout would echo through the halls at random intervals. We were constantly on edge, our senses on high alert. We encountered other pairs as we moved through the labyrinth. The tension between them was palpable. We saw Julian and his intimidating partner arguing in hushed, angry tones. We saw Chloe in tears, her partner looking on with a cold, indifferent expression. About an hour into the ordeal, a piercing scream echoed from somewhere deep within the labyrinth. It was a sound of pure terror, cut short abruptly. Alara and I froze, our eyes meeting in a shared look of dread. The host's warning that not all of us would be leaving had just become a brutal reality. The scream acted as a catalyst, transforming the underlying tension into open hostility. The game was no longer just about solving a puzzle. It was about survival. And in a game where the number of players was being actively reduced, your partner could just as easily become your rival. Alara and I pressed on, our pace now more urgent. We worked well together, my knowledge of history and artifacts complementing her sharp, logical mind. We managed to solve several more riddles, each one adding another layer to the tragic story of the family. We learned that the industrialist's wife had been committed to an asylum, and that the children had been left in the care of their increasingly unstable father. We reached a room that was different from the others. It was a child's nursery, but it was in a state of disarray. Toys were strewn across the floor, and the wallpaper was peeling. In the center of the room was a rocking horse, gently swaying back and forth on its own. The riddle on the pedestal was the most cryptic yet. I have a voice, but cannot speak. I have a heart, but cannot beat. I hold a secret, dark and deep. Rock me gently, and I will weep. We were stumped. We examined the rocking horse, the toys, the furniture, but we couldn't find a clue. The gentle, rhythmic creaking of the rocking horse was beginning to grate on my nerves. Suddenly, Alara's eyes lit up. The heart, she said. The riddle mentions a heart. She pointed to a small, heart-shaped carving on the chest of the rocking horse. I had missed it in the dim light. I reached out and pressed the carving. A small, hidden compartment clicked open. Inside was a small, brass key. As I took the key, the rocking horse began to sway more violently, the creaking sound growing louder, more insistent. It sounded almost like a wail. At that moment, Julian and his partner, a formidable woman named Katerina, entered the room. Julian's face was pale and slick with sweat, his eyes wide with fear. Katerina, on the other hand, looked angry, her face a thunderous mask. "Give us the key," Katerina demanded, her voice a low growl. "We found it," I said, my hand tightening around the small piece of brass. "We solved the riddle." "I don't care," she snarled. "We've been through 3 rooms with no solution. We're running out of time. Give me the key, or I'll take it." Julian looked torn. "Katerina, maybe we can work together," he began, but she cut him off with a sharp look. "There is no together in this game," she said, her eyes fixed on the key in my hand. I knew she was right. The host had designed this game to break us down, to turn us against each other. But I wasn't going to just hand over our only advantage. "You'll have to take it," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. Katerina smiled, a cold, predatory smile. "That can be arranged." She lunged at me. She was fast and strong, but I had been expecting it. I sidestepped her attack, and she stumbled past me. Alara, quick as a flash, grabbed a heavy, wooden toy block from the floor and hurled it at Katerina, hitting her squarely in the back of the head. Katerina grunted in pain and staggered, giving me the opening I needed. I tackled her, and we both went down in a heap. She was incredibly strong, her fingers like claws as she scrabbled for the key. I managed to hold her off, but it was a struggle. Julian just stood there, frozen in indecision, his face a mask of terror. "Do something," Katerina screamed at him. But before he could move, the disembodied voice of the host filled the room. "It seems we have a conflict. How delightful." A section of the wall slid open, revealing a hidden chamber. Inside was a single, ornate chair with leather straps at the arms and legs. An intricate network of wires and tubes connected the chair to a complex piece of machinery that hummed with a low, menacing energy. "The final piece of the puzzle lies through that door," the host said, his voice dripping with sadistic glee. "But only one pair can proceed. I believe a tiebreaker is in order." He then explained the rules of this new impromptu game. One member from each pair would be strapped into the chair. The other would be asked a series of questions about the tragic story we had been uncovering. For every correct answer, a mild electric shock would be administered to the person in the other team's chair. For every incorrect answer, the shock would be administered to their own partner. The first person to give up would forfeit the game for their pair. My blood ran cold. This was a new level of cruelty. Not only did we have to have solved the puzzle, but we had to be willing to inflict pain on a fellow player and risk our partner's suffering. Katerina, her eyes blazing with a fierce, competitive fire, immediately volunteered. "I'll go in the chair," she said, glaring at Julian. "Don't you dare get a single question wrong." I looked at Alara. The thought of her being subjected to that was unbearable. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll go in the chair." Alara looked at me, her expression unreadable behind her mask. "Leo, are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said, trying to inject a confidence I didn't feel into my voice. "You're better at remembering the details anyway. Just be careful." And so, Katerina and I were strapped into the chairs, our masked faces staring at each other across the small, hidden chamber. The straps were tight, a cold premonition of the pain to come. The host began the questions, his voice a dispassionate narrator in our private little horror show. The first question was for Alara. What was the name of the industrialist's wife? I held my breath. We had read her name in the diary. "Eleonora," Alara said, her voice clear and steady. "Correct," the host replied. I braced myself. A jolt of electricity, sharp and jarring, shot through Katerina's body. She grunted, her body convulsing against the straps. The next question was for Julian. What was the name of the family's youngest child? Julian hesitated, his eyes darting around nervously. I don't remember, he stammered. Incorrect, the host said, a hint of amusement in his voice. The correct answer was Thomas. A searing pain, far worse than I had imagined, coursed through my body. A scream tore from my throat, raw and involuntary. My muscles seized, and black spots danced in my vision. The game continued in this brutal fashion. "Stop!" he screamed, his voice cracking with anguish. "I can't do this. We forfeit." Katerina let out a roar of fury. "You coward!" she screamed at him. But it was too late. The straps on my chair clicked open. I stumbled out, my legs weak and trembling, my body screaming in protest. Alara rushed to my side, her hand on my arm providing a small, comforting anchor in the dizzying aftermath of the ordeal. "Congratulations," the host said, his voice laced with mock solemnity. "You have won this round. You may proceed. As for our losers..." The door to the hidden chamber slammed shut, trapping Julian and Katerina inside. Julian's terrified screams were abruptly cut off. We didn't know what their fate was, and I didn't want to. Leaning on Alara for support, I limped through the newly opened doorway, leaving the nursery and its horrors behind. We were now in a small, circular room. In the center was a pedestal, and on it, the final piece of the puzzle, a single black feather, identical to the one on Alara's mask. The final riddle was etched into the pedestal. "I am the final whisper, the last goodbye. I am the silence after the cry. I am the truth that you cannot deny. What am I?" I looked at the feather, and then at Alara's mask, and suddenly all the pieces clicked into place. The story of the family, the unsettling artifacts, the psychological games. It was all connected. "It's not about the family," I said, my voice a hoarse whisper. "Not really. It's a test. He's looking for something. Someone." Alara nodded, her gaze fixed on the feather. "He's recreating a trauma, a tragedy. He's looking for a specific response." The answer to the riddle was not a word, but an action, an understanding. I reached out and gently took the feather from the pedestal. As my fingers closed around it, a hidden door on the opposite side of the room slid open, revealing a path leading out of the labyrinth. We had done it. We had survived. But as we stepped out of the museum and back into the main part of the estate, I knew that this was far from over. We had won the battle, but the war was just beginning. And the host, I suspected, had far more twisted games in store for us. The echoing labyrinth was just the first circle of his private hell. The victory of escaping the labyrinth was a hollow one. The ordeal had taken its toll, not just on my body, which still ached from the electric shocks, but on my psyche. The lines between player, pawn, and predator were becoming increasingly blurred. We had been forced to inflict pain, to make choices that chipped away at our own humanity. The number of masked figures in the grand hall had dwindled significantly. We were a small, haggard band of survivors. Our formal were now disheveled, our eyes haunted. The host's voice, now a familiar and loathed presence, returned to congratulate us, the winners of the second trial. "Bravo," it purred, the sound slithering from hidden speakers. "You have navigated the labyrinth of the mind and emerged, if not unscathed, then at least intact. You have proven yourselves to be resilient, resourceful, and ruthless. All qualities I admire." There was a pause, a theatrical beat designed to heighten the suspense. "Now for the final game, the unmasking. This is not a test of wits or courage, but of conviction. It is the culmination of everything you have experienced tonight. In the center of this hall, you will find a single pedestal. On it rests a gun, a wave of cold dread, more profound than anything I had felt before, washed over me. A gun." The game had escalated from psychological torture to the brink of outright slaughter. "The rules are elegantly simple," the host continued, his voice taking on an almost reverent tone. "The last one standing wins. The ultimate prize is not just wealth beyond measure, but freedom. Your life. The choice is yours. You can walk away now, forfeit the game, and face the consequences. Or you can play. You can claim the prize that you have all suffered so much to be within reach of." The grand doors of the estate swung open, revealing the inky blackness of the night outside. It was a tempting offer, a sliver of hope in the suffocating darkness. But we all knew it was a lie. The host had already demonstrated his penchant for eliminating those who failed or refused to play. Walking away was not an option. We were trapped, not just within the walls of the estate, but by the twisted logic of the game itself. To survive, we had to be willing to kill. A heavy silence descended upon the remaining players. There were only 6 of us left. Myself, Alara, Marcus, the stoic man from our original group, Chloe, who was now a trembling, nervous wreck, and 2 other men I didn't know. We looked at each other, our masked faces concealing the maelstrom of emotions within. We had been strangers at the start of the night, then tentative allies, and now we were potential murderers. One of the unknown men, a tall, wiry individual, made a break for the open doors. He was halfway across the grand hall when he suddenly collapsed, his body twitching violently. A small, red dot appeared on his chest, and then another on his forehead. A sickeningly soft thump echoed through the hall. He was dead before he hit the marble floor. The host's voice returned, devoid of its previous warmth. I did say there would be consequences for forfeiting. The game is to be played to its conclusion. The doors swung shut, sealing our fate. The choice had been made for us. We all stood frozen, our eyes fixed on the pedestal in the center of the room. The gun, a sleek, black semi-automatic pistol, sat on a velvet cushion, its polished surface gleaming under the light of the chandelier. It was an object of immense power, a symbol of both salvation and damnation. No one moved. The air was thick with a tension so palpable it was almost difficult to breathe. We were caught in a deadly standoff, a macabre version of a Mexican standoff, but with only one gun. What do we do? Chloe whispered, her voice choked with tears. Marcus, who had been silent for most of the night, finally spoke, his voice a low, steady rumble. We don't have to do this. We don't have to play his game. He just killed a man for trying to leave. The other remaining man, a short, stocky individual, shot back, his voice edged with panic. What do you think he'll do if we all just refuse to play? It was Alara who broke the stalemate. She walked slowly, deliberately, towards the pedestal. My heart pounded in my chest. What was she doing? She reached the pedestal, but she didn't pick up the gun. Instead, she turned to face us. He wants us to turn on each other, she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that cut through the fear. That's been his goal from the beginning, to strip away our humanity, to prove that we're all just animals underneath these masks. She looked at each of us in turn, her gaze lingering on me for a moment. I won't do it. I won't become a monster for his amusement. Her words were a spark of defiance in the oppressive darkness. She was right. This whole elaborate, sadistic charade was a test, but not the one we thought it was. The real test was whether we could hold onto our morality in the face of death. Inspired by her courage, I stepped forward to stand beside her. She's right, I said, my voice finding a strength I didn't know I possessed. We don't have to kill each other. There has to be another way. Marcus nodded and joined us. Then, after a moment's hesitation, so did Chloe. The stocky man, however, remained where he was, his eyes still fixed on the gun. You're all fools, he snarled. He'll kill us all. At least with the gun, one of us has a chance. And what kind of life would that be? Alara countered, her voice soft but firm. To live with the knowledge that you murdered innocent people to save yourself? The man hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He was scared just like the rest of us. But his fear was pushing him towards a dark and irreversible path. The host's voice, now laced with an icy fury, filled the room. This is not what was intended. You are defying the rules. You are spoiling my game. The lights in the grand hall flickered and then died, plunging us into absolute darkness. A collective gasp of fear went through our small group. Then, a single spotlight illuminated the pedestal, the gun now seeming to glow with a malevolent light. Very well, the host said, his voice a low, menacing whisper. If you will not play the game as it was designed, then I will be forced to introduce a new variable. A section of the wall behind the grand staircase slid open, and a figure emerged. It was the whisperer from the first game, the man who had so coolly condemned the general to death. He was no longer wearing his guest attire, but was now clad in black tactical gear, and in his hands he held a rifle. Your time is up, the host's voice announced. The unmasking has begun. Eliminate them. The whisperer raised his rifle and my blood ran cold. This was it. We were all going to die. But then, something unexpected happened. The stocky man, who had been wavering on the edge of a terrible decision, let out a primal scream of rage and charged, not at us, but at the whisperer. He was fast, but the whisperer was faster. A single shot rang out, and the man fell, a dark stain spreading across his chest. But his sacrifice had bought us a few precious seconds. In that moment of chaos, I knew what I had to do. I ran towards the pedestal, my mind a blur of fear and adrenaline. I snatched the gun, its weight a cold, heavy reality in my hand. The whisperer turned his attention to me, his rifle swinging in my direction. I didn't have time to aim. I just pointed and fired. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. I missed. The bullet ricocheted off the marble floor with a sharp crack. The whisperer smiled, a cruel, confident smile, and took aim. But before he could fire, Ilara, with a courage that stunned me, threw herself at him, grabbing the barrel of his rifle and forcing it upwards. Another shot rang out, this one shattering the grand chandelier, sending a shower of crystal and glass raining down upon us. Marcus and I seized the opportunity. We both charged the whisperer, tackling him to the ground. He was strong and well-trained, and the struggle was brutal. He managed to shake off Marcus, but I held on, my fingers scrabbling for a grip. Ilara, recovering quickly, grabbed a large, heavy piece of the fallen chandelier and brought it down on the whisperer's head with all her might. He went limp, his body slumping to the floor. We stood there, panting, our bodies bruised and battered, in the dimly lit, debris-strewn hall. We had survived. But the game wasn't over. The host's voice, now stripped of all its previous composure, echoed through the room, filled with a raw, unadulterated rage. You have ruined everything. You were supposed to destroy each other. You were supposed to prove my thesis. A hidden door near the fireplace, one I hadn't noticed before, swung open, and a figure stepped out. He was a man of average height and build, dressed in a simple, dark suit. He was not wearing a mask. His face was pale and unremarkable, but his eyes burned with a fanatical, unhinged intensity. I am the host, he said, his voice no longer a disembodied sound, but the voice of the man standing before us. And this was my experiment. He began to pace back and forth, his movements agitated, like a caged animal. I wanted to prove that civilization is just a thin veneer, that underneath it all we are all just selfish, savage creatures, willing to do anything to survive. I created this game, this crucible, to strip away the masks of society and reveal the true face of humanity. He gestured around the ruined hall, at the bodies of the fallen players. I gave you all a choice, a chance to transcend your pathetic, ordinary lives. But you resisted. You clung to your pathetic little notions of morality and cooperation. I looked at this man, this architect of so much pain and death, and I felt not fear, but a profound sense of pity. He was a man so broken, so disillusioned with the world, that he could only see the darkness in it. You're wrong, Ilara said, her voice steady and strong. You didn't see the true face of humanity tonight. You saw what you wanted to see. You saw fear and you saw desperation. But you also saw courage. You saw sacrifice. You saw us choose to stand together, even when you did everything in your power to tear us apart. The host laughed, a harsh, grating sound. And what good did it do you? You are still trapped here. You are still at my mercy. He pulled a small remote from his pocket. This entire estate is rigged with explosives. I can bring the whole place down with the push of a button. If I can't have my desired outcome, then I will have a grand finale. My mind raced. The gun was still in my hand. I could shoot him, but what then? We would still be trapped. What was the story of the family? I asked, the question surprising even myself. The one in the labyrinth. What did it mean? The host stopped pacing and looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his wild eyes. It was my family, he said, his voice suddenly quiet, almost a whisper. That was my father, the industrialist who cared more for his work than his family. That was my mother, the woman he drove to madness. And those were my siblings, the ones he disposed of when they became an inconvenience. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The whole game, the whole twisted experiment, was a recreation of his own trauma. He wasn't just testing us. He was forcing us to relive his own personal hell. You're the son, I said. The one who survived. He nodded, a single tear tracking a path through the grime on his face. I survived, but I learned the truth of the world that night. There is no love. There is no loyalty. There is only survival. You're wrong, I said again, my voice softer this time. I took a step towards him, the gun held loosely at my side. What happened to you was a tragedy, but you've become the monster you were trying to expose. He looked at me, his face a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the broken child he must have been, but it was gone as quickly as it came. His eyes hardened, his face contorting into a mask of rage. It's too late, he hissed. It's all too late. He raised the remote, but before he could press the button, Chloe, who had been huddled in a corner, seemingly paralyzed with fear, let out a piercing scream. It was not a scream of terror, but of pure, unadulterated rage. She launched herself at the host, a small, forgotten shard of the chandelier clutched in her hand. He was so focused on me and Alara that he didn't see her coming. She plunged the shard of glass into his neck. He staggered back, a look of shocked surprise on his face. He dropped the remote, his hands going to his throat, from which a torrent of blood was now pouring. He looked at us, his eyes wide with a final, desperate plea, and then he collapsed to the floor. A stunned silence filled the room. The architect of our nightmare was dead. We stood there for a long moment, the four of us, the survivors of the masquerade of whispers. We were bruised, battered, and traumatized, but we were alive. And we were free. Marcus, ever the pragmatist, found the master controls for the estate in the host's hidden study and disabled the explosives. We walked out of the Elysian estate as the sun was beginning to rise, its first, tentative rays a welcome promise of a new day. We didn't talk much on the walk back to civilization. There were no words to adequately describe what we had been through. We were for strangers, bound together by a shared trauma, a dark secret that we would carry with us for the rest of our lives. As we reached the main road, we went our separate ways with a simple nod of understanding. There was nothing more to be said. My life, I knew, would never be ordinary again. I had been behind the mask, and I had seen the darkness that lurks in the human heart. But I had also seen the light. I had seen the courage of a woman who refused to become a monster, the sacrifice of a man who died to save others, and the quiet strength of a small group of strangers who chose to stand together in the face of absolute despair. The host was wrong. Humanity is not defined by its capacity for evil, but by its choice to resist it. And that, I realized, was the true prize we had won in his deadly game. It wasn't money or freedom. It was the knowledge that even in the darkest of nights, the human spirit can and will endure.